one of the key points that I just can't seem to escape is the number of times we find in the Gospels that the Jews were intent on killing Jesus. Now, I've known that, you've known that, but as I've gone through the Gospels over and over and over again, it has jumped out at me the number of times it says it. In fact, when he had gone through the 40 days in the wilderness and fasted and went through his temptation, the first place he went was down to the synagogue in Nazareth, and he picked up the scroll of Isaiah and he read, and then he said, "This day is this fulfilled in your ears." And immediately, I mean, he hadn't done any miracles, he hadn't done anything yet. They were ready to push him off a cliff. And it wasn't his time, so he kind of slipped through. But from day one of the announcement of his ministry, they were intent on killing him. Now, what was it about Jesus that was so controversial that the Jews believed they were doing God a favor by killing him? Here's an important question. You have to grapple with and resolve this. If Jesus was a good man, and he was, if Jesus was the representation of God in the earth, and he was, if the Old Testament scriptures clearly laid out from Genesis through Malachi this promise of a coming Messiah, and they did, over 300 prophecies, and Jesus fulfilled all of those messianic prophecies, why did his own people to whom the prophecies were given, why did they not recognize him? Why did they not receive him? And why did they have him crucified? I don't know that I've ever spent a whole lot of time really thinking about that until these past few weeks. Remember in John's Gospel, it opens in chapter 1, verse 11, where he says this, speaking of Jesus, John says, "He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him." So here's just a couple of examples from John's Gospel where he names the Jews as seeking to kill Jesus. In John chapter 7, verse 1, it says this, "After these things, Jesus was walking in Galilee, for he was unwilling to walk in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him." In John chapter 8, verses 37 to 40, and I highly recommend the whole chapter, but just for the sake of time, we're going to look at a couple of verses. But John 8, verse 37, "I know that you are Abraham's descendants, yet you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you." Now, we could spend all day just on that one sentence. "I speak the things which I have seen with my Father, therefore you also do the things which you have heard from your father." Now, I'm a big proponent of the concept that words mean things. And Jesus says, "I speak what I have seen, you do what you have heard." They answered and said to him, "Abraham is our father." And Jesus said, "If you're Abraham's children, then do the deeds of Abraham. But as it is," and here it is again, the second time, in just a few verses, "as it is, you are seeking to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God. This Abraham did not do." Well, that statement drove them nuts. What was it that drove them to want to kill Jesus? Well, I'm convinced that it is primarily one and only one thing was the primary focus of it, and that is he claimed to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses. of whom they said they were followers and descendants of and children of. And then there's multiple instances in the New Testament where Jesus identified himself as I am. Now, what's interesting is, in the English translations, in most of these situations, you'll find it attached to the word I am he, and if you have a good Bible, the he will be in italics, meaning that in the original text, the pronoun he does not occur. What Jesus was saying is, I am. Now, I am was the unspeakable name of God. When Moses came to the burning bush and says, well, whom shall I say has sent me? When he goes to Pharaoh, the voice from the burning bush said, tell them, I am has sent you. I am, the great I am, the unspeakable name of God. They came up with an alliteration. YHWH is what we think it was. Nobody can say for certain. And so from that we include the word Yahweh, YAHWEH, whatever it is. YWEH, whatever. Anyway, my brain went blank right there. Yes, thank you. YAWEH, yes. All right, so there's multiple times where he identifies himself as I am. We're going to look at 3 specific times. Well, we're only going to look at one, but in John 8, there are 3 specific times where he says it. We're going to pick up at verse 54. Jesus answered, John 8:54. Jesus answered, if I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It's my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. Now, Jesus, you've got to get the sarcasm that he throws these words out. He is tweaking these religious leaders, all right? If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he's our God. Now here's a real key statement, verse 55. And you have not come to know him. Now, folks, this is really why they killed him. They couldn't have this prophet who the people were beginning to follow. He was doing supernatural signs that had never been done before. Dead people are being raised up out of the dead. Blind people are getting their sight. Deaf people are beginning to hear. Lame people are beginning to walk. Lepers are being healed and cleansed. That had never happened. And so this following is getting behind him, and there's this building concept that this may be he may be the promised one. He may be the Messiah. And the Jewish leaders could not have that. And the bottom line is because they did not know God. Because Jesus makes the point, if you knew the Father, you would recognize me. The proof that you don't know the Father is that you're wanting to kill me. Now let's just continue. You have not come to know him, but I know him, and if I say I don't know him, I'll be a liar just like you because I do know him. Well, that made him real happy. And the way I know him is how? I keep his word. Your father, Abraham, rejoiced to see my day. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've said it before, John 8 is my favorite chapter in the whole Bible. And part of the reason for that is this right here. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Now just put a pause right there. How do we know this? The writer of Hebrews says that Abraham, in fact several writers said it, Paul, and I think Paul wrote Hebrews too, so it doesn't matter. But Paul says, Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. In Galatians, he says he believed in the gospel. In Hebrews, it says he considered that God was able to raise men from the dead. Now, how did he know that God was able to raise men from the dead? It was because he had believed in the gospel, and he knew that God was going to send forth his son, who was going to be crucified, who was going to rise from the dead, and Abraham believed it so much that he knew God could not lie. And therefore, if God was requiring his own son, and Hebrews uses the words concerning Abraham's son Isaac, his only begotten son, he knew that if God was requiring his only son, and the promise was only going to be fulfilled through this son, then God was able to raise his son from the dead just as God would raise his son from the dead. That's what Jesus is talking about. And the Jews said to him, "You're not even 50 years old, and you say you've seen Abraham?" Now, Abraham was 1,400 years prior to this. You're not even 50 years old, and you say, in fact, Abraham was almost 2,000 years prior to this, and you say you've seen Abraham? And Jesus said, and this is the most emphatic declaration of his godhood, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was even born, I am." The unmentionable name of God. And he applies it to himself. And they responded in brokenness and humility and fell down and began to worship him? No, they picked up stones to throw at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. Now, it was his claim to be, "I am," that enraged them. And they simply could not accept that he, this man standing in front of them, had been the God that called Abraham, that led Isaac and Jacob, and that spoke to Moses from the burning bush. They could not accept that. And so they accuse him of lying to them. They accuse him of blasphemy. And they had to stamp out this movement that was getting out of control and was causing a lot of Jewish people to become his followers. So they plot to kill him.